Alright, so this is Boneng versus H2O, expert replay analysis done by yours truly. We'll get into the game. This matchup is played on Yucatan, a water-oriented map. The players are Boneng, who's a fairly well-known high-level Japanese player, and H2O, the boy wonder, who hails from the United States of America, is fairly well known for his triumphs in WCG 2008. Into the game we go. Boneng is playing down here in the bottom position. He is the person who ends up winning the game, so I'm going to be primarily following him. But there are some aspects of this gameplay that are played by H2O that are absolutely fabulous that I do want to touch on. But as I was saying, there's some pretty fabulous stuff that H2O does in this game that is really high level that I do want to touch on. So he's already doing some really cool stuff that we'll get to. But just quickly, because someone did specifically ask for an Ottoman build order as well the next time I was doing one of these, I just want to run through the Boneng build order that he does in this game, which is a very standard and very strong way to play Ottoman. You get your first TP, just like you always would. Ottoman should always get a TP on a TP available map. The build order that he goes with is fairly standard. 3 villagers, 700 wood, and then more crates depending on what you're aging up with. He does go for a Jan Abus style, which is one of 2 ways really to play this matchup. You can play it with the Jan Abus style, or you can elect to go with a very aggressive FF option as well. And he does elect to go with the Jan Abus style. And I want to hop over to H2O's base and just show some of the preparation that he's gone into. If we take a look at what he's got going on in his base, he's done a couple of things already. One, he's already started to herd all of his hunts, so they're in a very nice centralized location. And 2, he's got both of his manors very smartly placed. I know a lot of people wouldn't put much care into where they're putting their very first houses, especially with Brit. We can see Boneng's just kind of throwing his down here. But H2O has put his in a very smart spot, realizing he's up against one of 2 things: either an FF, where he's going to potentially need to have as much infrastructure out front of his base to give him time to adapt to what's coming through the shipments, and maybe just buy some time through the 2 Falconet shipment, or he's going to be against Jan Abus, in which case his best option of living is to do some sort of very turtly defensive build, and as a result has placed his buildings in such a way that they'll buy him quite a bit of time in the very early portions of that pressure. So we do see Boneng, 3 villager has been sent. We're just going to start to fast forward through some of this. He's playing Ottoman, the villagers are just continuing to tick away. Does something very smart here. Puts most of his villagers back on wood, gathers up 200 extra wood, and has his explorer in a position where he can go and build another trading post. After gathering enough for another trading post, pulls all of his villagers back off wood and puts them all back on food so that he can eventually get his resources back flowing again. Moves a villager forward here at some point to be able to build a forward Rex, and this is kind of how you play the very abusive Jan Abus style. Notice back in H2O's base, continuing to build very smartly with his houses, taking very careful care to put his buildings in very smart spots. Notice how the houses are all giving this very nice structure combined with the native post to his base here, closing off any gaps that might be able to be snuck through by Jans and Abuses, and just giving him a place to be able to continually defend from. Boneng, as we mentioned, is building his barracks in this forward location, which is going to result in a nice jumping off place for his units to be able to be built from. At the same time, playing very economically, getting his stagecoach upgrade, everything very normal. So 3 villagers, 700 wood, has 2 trading posts already established, has himself stagecoach coming, and has his first batch of Janissaries queued up. This is a very nice economic way to play the game. For Ottoman, usually you don't associate autos with eco, but having extra TPs, especially on a good TP map like this, is certainly good. And we see that starting to come to fruition, getting stagecoach. Has some very nice Janissary pressure going to come here very soon. And in the meanwhile, H2O just building his base very smartly, has himself a barracks up, and is going to try and deal with this early pressure with essentially pure longbow, and that might be a bit of a spoiler alert, but he does a really good job of dealing with the pressure that comes from Boneng with just pure longbows. So out of that 700 wood that was sent by Boneng, we do also have an artillery foundry coming once again in this forward location, which is going to result in him having the very standard look to his infrastructure, having a barracks and an artillery foundry, and having 2 trading posts to his name. Next card is 700 gold, going to allow him to just continue to spam units out of both of these. We can see for the most part, most of his villagers are continuing to gather food and food only, and at this point just using the 700 gold to be able to make both Janissaries and Abyss guns when it becomes available. H2O, on the other hand, does have Yumis, or longbows out, and I can't stress how important this very good building placement is. We'll see this market get killed probably 2 or 3 times and be rebuilt in the exact same spot, just because it's essentially a nice big building that he can use to buy himself some time. Does get 1 Janissary kill there, but at the same time, he's not super worried about losing like maybe 1 unit. But at the same time, if we pop back on his fog, like this is a bit intimidating to push into, right? He's kind of got what his opponent has scouted out. He's got this tower centrally located between his resources and his gold mines. He has this very defensive barracks placed up, and he's got all this very well-placed infrastructure out front of his base. And if you're making units that don't necessarily have a lot of good mobility, and are a little bit exposed to potential longbows and just the range of longbows in general, this is a little bit daunting to push into. This is very difficult to push into, and it's very hard to find a spot to push into this. And we'll see how H2O eventually ends up following this up. Obviously, the one thing he is lacking at this point in the game is some sort of map control. He doesn't really have any map control, and should his resources run out, eventually he's going to have to find some other way to secure resources. Now, we'll see in a little bit that he elects to go with some sort of water option, but at the same time, Boneng just wants to get in here, wants to be able to fight, does take down the market, but because of the pretty good control, only ends up getting 1 longbow for it. And once again, now he has to decide, do I push into the longbows and the potential TC fire, the potential outpost fire, maybe Minutemen, stuff like that, or where do I go from here? Certainly most people are trained not to siege down Brit houses, and that is kind of the case. But because there's so many longbows back here, and because they're being controlled fairly well, he's kind of forced to go back once again, trying to find some sort of chink in the armor here, but for the most part, the building placement is really good. And we'll see this kind of theme just continues to develop. Now that he's got this hole open, he wants to try and keep this hole open. We see H2O trying to rebuild a market here for multiple reasons. One, it helps have this up, obviously, because it's a market, and you need a market to trade resources and get upgrades. But you also need it to help continue to restrict this pathing. So once again, H2O falling back to his base, using his longbows as best as he possibly can. To attempt to try and buy him as much time as possible. And this is a big crucial point in the game, because this is actually fought really well by H2O. He uses his villagers. I actually want to pop over to his vision briefly. He's at 34 villagers at 8 minutes. That's fairly normal. But look what how well he controls his villagers. There is 8 villagers up here up front. He's still gathering resources with the relevant villagers that he needs to continue to produce units. But he's using a couple of his villagers to just body block the damage that the potential Jans and Abysses can put out. This is only 1 villager, and in the process drives back the 3 Hussars, and effectively just kind of like stifles the push. Obviously the Minutemen help there in that regard as well. Obviously his opponent misrallying units helps as well, but even still, not many people would pick off both of those Abyss guns like that. That was fairly well controlled, and now we can finally see the follow-up. He realizes, obviously, at some point, hey, I'm going to need to get out of this base and be able to establish some sort of food economy. Because the map is Yucatan, he's going to elect to do that by means of water. So, going to pop back over to Boneng. Boneng obviously, at this point, just wants to try and keep up the pressure. The market trying to be reestablished once again. Unfortunately for Boneng, this time the market does get reestablished, meaning he will have to siege down 2,000 hit points of a market if he wants to reopen up that crack in the armor of his opponent. And for the time being, H2O re-has his nice little wall set back up. And he has a plan to follow it up. He's got a couple docks coming. He's going to be able to fish. And at the same time, Boneng's like lost quite a bit of stuff. I mean, he's only at 59 population. He's lost quite a few Avis, quite a few Gen. H2O, meanwhile, is working at about 65 pop himself. And he's setting up another layer of defenses here, realizing that this seems to be a location that his opponent is keen on pushing at, setting up a few more houses, just kind of solidify his position over here, and just continuing to keep his longbows in smart spots, picking off some gems, giving as much damage as possible to his opponent, and at the same time brings in a little bit of ship support here to try and stifle his opponent's potential on water. Now, at the same time, the longbows are still being very well controlled. They're still hiding behind here. His splitting is honestly quite impressive. He's getting a lot of kills. I mean, we saw 40 units die. He's not just attacking his longbows. He's selecting individual groups and selecting individual units to kill, dropping 2 more gems there. And all this pressure he's been able to divert with a single barracks, which to me is maybe the most impressive part. He's been able to do all of this with only a single barracks behind this, which is, I would normally opt for like double barracks, but it's allowed him to get docks up and stuff like that. Allowed him to establish an outpost here to help solidify his docks, and is going to help him eventually win water because he's got structure up elsewhere and hasn't had to devote as many resources to just the pure defense here. And a lot of that just comes down to the good building placement as well, which has obviously been quite strong. And so now at this point, if you're Boneng, you've got to make a decision because, let's be perfectly honest, Brit is being Brit. He's starting to kind of get a little bit of a score advantage. Obviously, you'd want to kick him in the teeth and kind of keep him down, not really let him establish on water, stuff like that. But let's be perfectly honest, Boneng's still sitting at 22 vills, hasn't really improved his economic presence really whatsoever, still only has these 2 trading posts. His opponent is Brit and is established on water. You do momentarily have him penned up, but at the same time, you have to make a decision. And this is, I think, where I think Boneng makes a little bit of a mistake. I think, in all honesty, I think if you were to rewatch this, I think you would say, you know, I probably should have aged around now. Because obviously this pressure isn't really working out for me. I'm losing a lot more than I'm gaining with this pressure. Really, all he's killed is like a villager, a market, and like maybe like 5 or like not many longbows, a couple longbows, but certainly hasn't really done any lasting damage to his opponent. H2O is still at 44 villagers. He's shipping offshore support. He's got like some pretty nifty stuff going on water. And yet Boneng is still just kind of focusing on this like Jan Abus presence. He's not really got any follow-up planned, not sitting on the required resources to continue aging up or anything like that. And so I think this is maybe his a little bit of his mistake. Sure, he has gotten a lot of nice map control as a result of this, but it maybe would have been better off if you would have just aged, gotten up like 2 Velks to be able to push down this infrastructure a little bit more quickly and a little more safely from the longbow fire. But instead does elect to ship light artillery hit points and try and just keep the contain up and continue playing the long game, which I think against Brit might be a little bit of a mistake. Obviously, Boneng's a very good player, and he does make some pretty good plays a little bit later on to bring himself back above par, but at this point, especially seeing that, like, just you step up one time to get that damage on that market, and I mean, he's got a pretty good unit count, but obviously against the longbows with their just insane range and just the amount of stuff that's here in the way, I think he's got to be thinking like, I need to do something different. And so I think, I mean, we can see his resources starting to build now up to the required resources to age. But to be perfectly frank, I think I would have elected to do this one card earlier. I think his next card here is 700 gold, and he does eventually decide to age up. If he even ships gold. Does he even ship gold? I don't remember. Does he? He must certainly ship gold here pretty quick. Oh, no, he just decides to sell resources and age up, which is okay too. But the important thing is he does get aged up. I think if I were him, I would have shipped 600 gold instead of light artillery hit points, just to get that age up started a little bit faster. Notice it's already 14 minutes. He spent quite a bit of time, and resources into a contain that has contained. But I mean, let's be honest. He's losing water over here. He's not winning water by any means. His opponent has taken the native TP. His opponent has got canoes out, caravels. He's going to lose water here very quickly if he's not careful. And indeed, he does actually just straight up end up losing water. And that's kind of how H2O is really able to establish himself back in the game. We do have a couple things going on. Obviously, the armor has been re-solidified here on the right-hand side. The galleys are falling down quickly. H2O is effectively one water, and if I'm Boneng at this point, I'm really worried because he's lost a lot of stuff here on water. He's not really been super effective with his pressure, and he's playing against a Brit player who's working at, what, 53 villagers versus 27. So it's something he certainly has to be aware of and be very careful about. And he has to find a way to be able to do some lasting damage moving forwards into the Third Age, which obviously, because I've given the spoiler, he must find some way to do that. Tries to go in and look at the native TP. Longbowman just there to instantly push him away. Is getting his veterancy upgrades, which are very important for both his Janissaries and his Avis guns eventually as well. And just continuing to mass gens and Avis. And this is the two Falconets that I would like to see, like, maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago. He hasn't really accomplished much with the cards that he's been sending recently. But holy crap, where did those come from? Look at that. So this is the kind of push I think that maybe needed to come a little bit earlier. Obviously, because he has a lot of Janissaries left alive, he's in an okay spot with these Falconets, but this is the point where we need to start slowing it down, because this is where the fun stuff happening. I think if he would have just aged up at, like, oops, don't quit. If he would have just aged up at like 12 minutes and shipped 2 Falcons, he wouldn't have been in this position where he had to find some way to deal with this infrastructure. Nonetheless, a very strong follow-up. Shipping Janissary Combat has a fairly large Janissary count, and he has a lot of Falconets. What does H2O have? He's aging slowly, because remember, Brits don't have any way to fast age. He's established on both sides of the waters quite heavily, has canoes out, is able to completely dominate both sides of the water at this point in the game. And he still has to worry about this now, which ends up being a very scary thing. We can see these markets trying to be rebuilt, and this is where the markets end up saving them quite a bit of time here. But at the same time, this is a very scary thing to deal with. If you're a Brit player, this is a very upgraded army, and the Falconets are quite scary here as well. He does have the artillery foundry already established, just because he's Brits, and Brits have grenadiers available to him in the Second Age, meaning that he can immediately begin to train culverins, which are anti-cannon cannons, as soon as he were to age up. But still, this is probably the deciding point of the game. He's just a little bit too late in the age up, and as a result, he's bringing all of these villagers forward to once again try and body block for him. This is something that H2O does very well. He does quite often. Anytime he tries to cut too many corners and get away with it, ends up overmaking on vills. He uses his vills to try and buy him some time. And unfortunately here, although vills are fairly good when they're in melee against cannons, unfortunately Janissaries and Avis guns are pretty good against Falconets, are pretty good against villagers as well. So obviously this was not super good for H2O, but very similarly to the game we saw of H2O's last time, he makes a pretty insane comeback. And we have to remember, he is on water. He still does have 48 villagers. He's now followed his opponent up. He's in the third age. At the same time, he does have to worry about potentially being able to deal with these falconets. Does kill one with town center fire, but now that his opponent has finally gotten in, what does this look like? Now that his opponent has finally gotten in, he's got 4 villagers in here. Sure, those are bound to die. But what? He's saved most of his army, most of his villagers here on the right-hand side, has reestablished his artillery foundry, has cauldrons coming back up, and now he's kind of got his opponent trapped. His opponent really can't get out, save for blowing his way through more houses. Obviously, H2O has full vision of his opponent, is going to be able to identify exactly where the army is standing and how he wants to deal with it. And as a result, this structure has not only paid off for itself in keeping his opponent out, but now it's going to kind of effectively keep his opponent penned in. And as a result, we're going to see one of the most insane cauldron volleys that I've maybe ever seen in a recorded game. There are, what, still 3, I think a 4th maybe, cauldron coming up. I don't remember if there's a 4th. I could have swore there was 4. Maybe another one gets built. Or maybe there's just 4 here. But either way, one of my favorite points in this whole game is coming up. Meanwhile, for H2O, have veterancy upgrades for longbows coming, stuff like that. Obviously, there's still a lot of scary stuff here for Boneng. The ship, the frigate, has now been established for H2O, and he's kind of just clinging to the shores and just kind of trying to hang on for as long as he can. There is 4 falconets. So there's 4 falconets established. There are, I believe, 4 cauldrons, and not many people would get all 4 of these. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but like I said, one of the most insane cauldron shots you'll ever see in your life. I'll set up the camera as best as I can, and all this is due to the fact. Note that this is fog of war on. He knows exactly where his opponent is. He can set up his army exactly how he wants, and it's all just come back to. He's essentially still alive in this game for 20 minutes, at the 21-minute mark, because he's effectively walled with his building so well. Like, this game has essentially been purely won, or purely even, just due to the fact that he has superior building placement. Here come the falconets, or the cauldrons forward, getting into position. And there goes 2 with 1 shot. And I think the other 2 follow with this next volley. Yeah, there they go. So 4 falconets, and like Boneng, like, that has to be an oh shit moment for him. Like, he has just lost 2,000 resources worth of cannons to a single volley. He's losing water. He's shipped the frigate, but he can't break water on this side either. And if I'm Boneng, like, I almost feel like I've lost, but obviously Boneng is, I'm not Boneng, and Boneng hangs in there, it tries to wall in the Explorer, stuff like that. Realize, of course, now that we are fighting inside this wall versus outside this wall, the longbows are once again abusing the fact that this wall has been so well placed. Except this time just from the other side of the wall, launching volleys over from right to left, and doing significant damage. And Boneng's really just, I feel like he's just got to get out of there, but managed to hang around. All this time, I do have to mention that he has continued to have map control. He has been able to hunt this whole time. He is building town centers. He is taking the necessary means to continue improving his position. So he still does have very strong units. He has very upgraded units. He is continuing to establish his presence on the map. So just like H2O is using his buildings smartly to kind of save himself as much as possible, Boneng is using his buildings quite smartly as well to just establish as much presence on the map as possible. Has 3 TPs now working for him, 2 town centers. Not just kind of giving in. And maybe the all-important card that we've all been looking for, 5 Mamelukes, is about to pop out. At this point, H2O has a pretty scary-looking army, but let's be honest, even with a 50 score advantage, that's not enough to keep you safe from Mamelukes. Where did the Mamelukes come? Did they come to this TC yet? So here it comes. This is kind of the defining fight. No, it's not either, because I think the defining fight doesn't happen for a while. We still have these 5 Mems coming forward. The Pikes are a little bit out of position, but upon seeing them, they do get back into position fairly quickly. And obviously the Mems are just like so strong here. The overall efficiency of Mems is way too good to be in this game. Like they're just not balanced. But either way, a lot of units get cleaned up here by Boneng for free. H2O does kill one of the Mamelukes and get most of the HP off a couple more. But at the end of the day, if we toggle back to his eco, he's at like 58 villagers. He has a lot of gold, just because he's been able to gather whales here. But he's quickly beginning to run out of the other resources required. He can't really secure a lot of food. And once again, forced to bring this big villager fight, realizing, of course, that he's trying to sacrifice villagers and some of their HP just to give the longbows enough time to continue to fight. Boneng does a good job of trying to avoid them as much as possible. Yet at the same time, even though the villagers are taking fairly heavy casualties, the longbowmen effectively are doing their job. They are getting a lot of kills. They're killing a lot of stuff, but at the same time, he's losing quite a few villagers as a result of it as well. So this is maybe one of the most defining fights. Although Boneng does lose quite a bit of stuff here, he does kill quite a few villagers as a result as well. And probably just because the economic blows have been just one too many for H2O. This is probably the biggest turning point. Obviously, 5 Spahi coming in next are going to be very difficult to deal with pure longbow. And just the overall HP of the veteran Abyss guns and the Janissaries is very difficult to deal with. A couple Falconets do pop out, do buy him a little bit more time. But at the same time, Boneng is doing a fairly good follow-up as well. He's got 3 town centers now established, all creating villagers, pretty good mosque upgrades, and is beginning to reestablish his army supply as well, making these very cost-effective, very expensive, but very strong units as well. So continuing just to make those. And I think at this point, I mean, we can kind of see eventually the map presence is just worn down. Boneng is continuing to gather resources. The top side is for the most part fished out. There's the whales, but he really needs food to continue to produce this musket longbow stuff that he's doing. The bottom side of the map still does have some availability, but there's this one annoying tower that has been established. And for the most part, Boneng just has still availability to gold mines, availability to hunts, and H2O is just slowly running out of resources available to him on the map, and has been worn down. And as a result, Boneng 49 villagers versus H2O at 38 after that last fight. A fairly low villager scoring affair here at this point in the game. But if you don't fight with your villagers sometime, probably just end up dying. So the rest of the game obviously comes down to these Spahi do a lot of damage. They're quite effective at what they do. Pretty well controlled, honestly, on both sides. The Falconets do eventually still remain for Boneng. And this is, I think, most people can kind of see like where the end of the game is slowly going to begin to come. But I just wanted to show this game because I thought it was really well controlled in the very early portion game by Brit. And I think the Ottoman player did a good job of establishing the map control. If we can see how much map vision the Otto player still has, he's got so much of the map established. And so 2 things to take away from this game. One, building placement is incredibly important, just due to the fact that we saw how efficiently the longbows were able to abuse that in the very early portions of the game. And 2, when your opponent has been walling you out with buildings and is continuing to not allow you to push in, don't play overly greedy. just try and take as much of the map as you can and wait for him to come to you. Eventually, he's going to starve himself out. Unless he's able to, you know, establish himself on water, do stuff like that. Eventually, he's got to come out at least for like a gold mine or hunt or something, at which point you can then try and kill him in that way. And you can see Boneng just continuing to power ahead, gets himself into the 4th age, has factories, bombards, stuff like that, shipment. And this is like kind of the last, this is the kind of last-ditch effort by H2O. He's got a pretty good army, but at the end of the day, Boneng's aged up. And I think we can all kind of see where this is going to go. The Spahi coming in from the backside, still 3 Felks. We now have guard Janissaries upgraded, so very, very strong units. And maybe just the icing on the cake, we do have the 2 great bombard shipment coming from our Ottoman player as well. So I don't think there's any doubts in who's going to win this fight. With the guard Janissaries, the 2 great bombards now out, and the remaining falconets still being quite problematic as well. I think we get 1 or 2 big volleys here by the bombards and the falconets, and stuff just starts dropping for our Brit player. And as well as he played in the very early portion of the game, at the end of the day, this matchup probably just comes down to balance. When played between 2 really high-level players, eventually it just gets to a point where Brit has a tough time beating Otto. As well as he played with his very early building placement and such, the game is effectively over at this point. H2O has only 40 villagers left. Most of the fish, especially on the top side, have been completely mined out, and he really has no map to work with. He has no resources to gather. He's not in the 4th age like his opponent is. He only has 300 paltry gold remaining, and you know, a couple trees that are kind of not exposed. And aside from that, Boneng has effectively strangled him out and starved him out, collecting most of the map advantage as a result. So that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks for tuning in. It's been fun as always.